I found the invitation on the kitchen counter, still warm from the printer, on the same afternoon I lost my baby. My name was on the guest list. Crossed out. Not erased. Crossed out, hard, in my husband's handwriting, the pen pressed so deep it tore the paper. Above the line, someone had written a different name in looping cursive. Marlowe Vance. Guest of honor. Baby shower. 7 months along. I was still recovering when I read it. I want to tell you my name is Wren Sutton, and 3 weeks ago I would have told you I had a good life. A house outside Charleston with a wraparound porch. A husband, Grant Ashford, who ran his family's shipping brokerage. A nursery half painted the color of new grass, because we hadn't decided yet if we were having a boy or a girl. We were going to decide together. I remember thinking that was romantic. I remember a lot of things I used to think were romantic. The morning it happened, I woke up to cramping I told myself was nothing. By noon I was on the bathroom floor of a hospital I'd never been to, and a nurse with kind eyes was holding my hand and not saying the word out loud, because she didn't have to. I called Grant 4 times. He didn't pick up until the 5th. "I'm in a meeting," he said. "Can it wait?" It could not wait. I told him what was happening in a voice that didn't sound like mine, and there was a long pause on the other end, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "I'll come when I can," and hung up. He came 3 hours later. Not to the hospital. To the house. I was already home by then, curled on the couch under the blanket his mother had knitted for a grandchild who would never wear it. He walked in smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, something warm and expensive, jasmine, and something underneath it I couldn't name, and he looked at me on the couch, gray and hollowed out, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "Why isn't dinner ready?" I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, the way I had to sit with it. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry I wasn't there." "Why isn't dinner ready?" I didn't answer him. I couldn't. He went upstairs to shower, to wash off her perfume, though I didn't understand that yet, and I lay there staring at the ceiling until I heard the water shut off, and then I got up and went to the kitchen to make him something, because that is who I had trained myself to be for 6 years of marriage. A woman who makes dinner even when she is still hollowed out with grief. That's when I saw the invitation on the counter, propped against the fruit bowl like it belonged there. Cream cardstock, gold foil lettering. A celebration of new life. Hosted by the Ashford family. And my name, crossed out. I didn't cry. I want to be honest with you about that because I think people expect tears in a moment like this, and what I felt instead was something colder and much more useful. I felt my whole body go very still, the way water goes still right before it freezes. I read it 3 times. Then I heard Grant's footsteps on the stairs, and I slid the invitation into the drawer where we kept the takeout menus, and I turned around and smiled at my husband like I hadn't just found out his family was planning a party for the woman carrying his child on the same day I'd lost mine. You might be wondering how long this had been going on. So was I. That question became the center of my next 3 weeks, and I promise you, the answer was worse than anything I imagined that first night. Grant and I met when I was 26, waiting tables at a restaurant near the harbor where his family did business. He was charming in the specific way that men who've never been told no are charming, attentive, quick with compliments, generous with money. He didn't consider that valuable. He used to leave notes folded under the salt shaker before he learned my name, little jokes about the weather or the wine list, and I used to think that was the most romantic thing that had ever happened to me. I was 26 and tired and paying my own way through community college at night, and here was a man who noticed which table was mine before he noticed anything else about the restaurant. His mother, Diane Ashford, ran the family the way she ran her charity boards, with a smile that never reached past her teeth, and a very clear sense of who belonged and who was merely tolerated. I was the second kind. I understood that within a month of meeting her, at a dinner where she asked me twice, in front of company, where exactly my people were from, as though my last name needed an explanation hers didn't. I married her son anyway because I loved him, and because I believed love was supposed to be difficult in exactly this specific way, like something you had to earn from people who didn't want to give it to you. For a while, it worked. Grant could be soft in ways that surprised me. He learned how I took my coffee without asking twice. He drove 4 hours once to sit with me in a hospital waiting room when my father's heart gave him trouble. He cried, actually cried, the day we found out I was pregnant, pressing his forehead to my stomach like he was listening for something only he could hear. I want to be honest about that too, because it would be easy to tell you he was a monster from the very beginning, and it would be a lie. People don't become the worst version of themselves all at once. They erode. And I spent 6 years mistaking the slow parts of that erosion for the ordinary weather of a long marriage. That night, after I found the invitation, I didn't sleep. I lay next to Grant and listened to him breathe, and I thought about every strange absence of the last year. The business trips to Savannah that never showed up on his calendar when I glanced at it. The new gym membership at a place 40 minutes from either of our offices. The phone he'd started taking into the bathroom with him. By morning I had a plan. Not a plan for revenge. Not yet. A plan to find out the truth, quietly, completely, before I let anyone know that I knew anything at all. I started with his email. Not his personal one, he was careful about that, but the shared drive we used for our finances, the one he'd forgotten I still had access to since we'd merged our banking 2 years earlier. It took me 4 days of careful, patient searching before I found the trail, because Grant was careful too. But careful men make one mistake eventually, and his was thinking I'd never look. There was an account. A separate one, opened 14 months ago, funded by transfers from the family brokerage's operating account. Money that was supposed to be sitting in escrow for client shipments, not funding an apartment lease in Marlo Vance's name, or the 4 figures a month that had been quietly moving into it ever since. Grant wasn't just having an affair. He was stealing from his own family's company to pay for it, and dressing it up in the books as logistics consulting fees. I sat with that for a long time. Because here's the thing about a man who will steal from his own mother to keep a secret. He has already decided that everyone else's trust is a resource to be spent, not a thing to be honored. I had been married to that man for 6 years. I had lost a baby in his house days ago, and he had walked in smelling like the woman he was stealing for. I want to tell you the anger came first, but it didn't. What came first was clarity. A very quiet, very cold understanding that I was done being someone this family merely tolerated. There was one more thing in that folder, something I almost missed because I was scrolling too fast, too eager to be done looking. A calendar invite, sent from Grant's work account to Marlo's personal email, 14 months old, titled simply, "Lease signing, congrats." 14 months. I did the math 3 times before I let myself believe it, because 14 months put the start of that apartment, that account, that entire second life, 6 weeks before I had even told Grant I was pregnant with a baby I lost. He hadn't strayed because our marriage broke under the weight of a miscarriage, the way I might have almost let myself believe in a kinder version of this story. He had already built an entire second life before he knew I was carrying his child at all. My pregnancy hadn't caused this. It had simply been inconvenient timing for a man already halfway out the door. That distinction mattered to me more than I expected it to. Grief is easier to survive when you can tell yourself it broke something that used to be whole. It is a different, harder thing to survive when you realize the thing you thought was whole had already been hollowed out for over a year, and you were the only one who hadn't been told. The baby shower, a celebration of new life, may that phrase never leave me, was scheduled for the following Saturday, 10 days after I'd lost mine. 10 days. Diane Ashford had known about her son's mistress and the pregnancy for months, it turned out, and had decided the appropriate response was to host a party in her own backyard, complete with a calligrapher for the place cards. I did not confront Grant. I did not confront Diane. I did something I don't think either of them expected from the woman they'd spent 6 years quietly underestimating. I made a phone call to my cousin Isla, who worked compliance for a maritime insurance underwriter, and I asked her, in the gentlest voice I could manage, what happens to a shipping brokerage's insurance and licensing when an audit uncovers unaccounted for client funds. Isla, God bless her, didn't ask why I wanted to know. She just told me, if an auditor rather than a family member ever surfaced an account like Grant's, the brokerage's insurers would drop them outright, and no port authority in the state would let them operate again. 30 years of Diane's business, finished inside a single fiscal quarter. I had, in my hands, the ability to end everything Diane cared about more than she had ever cared about me. And for the first time since I'd lost my baby, I felt something other than grief. I didn't act on it yet. I wanted the divorce filed and the evidence in Priya's hands first, so that whatever happened next would happen through a court, not through me. I went to the baby shower. I want you to picture that, because I still can't quite believe I did it myself. I put on a pale blue dress, the one Grant said made me look soft, and I walked into Diane Ashford's backyard 10 days after losing my own child, and I smiled at every single person who dared to make eye contact with me. Diane looked like she'd swallowed a wasp. Marlo Vance, 7 months pregnant, sun-kissed and glowing in white linen, actually had the nerve to ask me to feel the baby kick. "Congratulations," I told her, and meant every syllable of it as a quiet promise, not a pleasantry. There was a woman there I didn't recognize at first, Grant's cousin's wife, a soft-spoken woman named Odette who'd always been kind to me at holidays, the sort of relative who remembers your birthday when no one else in that family does. She pulled me aside near the drink table, her voice low, and told me she was sorry, that she hadn't known how to reach me, that she'd heard about the baby from her mother-in-law and hadn't slept right since. Then she said something that stayed lodged in me for days afterward, that this wasn't Diane's first time hosting a party for someone else's family while quietly discarding the woman already married in. That Grant's father had done something similar, decades ago, and Diane had helped him bury it the same way she seemed prepared to help Grant now. It wasn't an affair Diane was covering for. It was a pattern she'd learned to manage like a business line. That single conversation reshaped everything I thought I understood about the woman I was about to sit across a table from. Diane wasn't an unwitting mother blindsided by her son's choices. She was a woman with a decades-old playbook, and I was simply the latest wife she intended to run it on. I stayed 40 minutes. I ate a piece of cake shaped like a booty. I complimented Diane's roses, and watched her accept the compliment like it was owed to her. And when I left, I hugged Grant at the door, in front of everyone, and I whispered in his ear, low enough that only he could hear, "I found the account. 14 months of it. I know what logistics consulting means. And I know your father did this too." I watched the color drain out of his face in real time, like watching a pipe burst. He grabbed my wrist. I let him, for exactly 1 second, so that everyone at that party would see it happen, and then I pulled away, smiled at his mother one more time, and walked to my car. He called me 11 times before I got home. Here is where the story would end, in a lesser telling. The wife finds the affair, confronts the husband, files for divorce, moves on. Clean. Simple. Satisfying in the small way that simple things are satisfying. But I hadn't come for simple. I had lost a child in that house, and I intended to leave nothing standing that wasn't mine. The next morning, I met with a family law attorney named Priya Okonkwo, whose name I'd gotten from a friend days earlier, before I'd even fully admitted to myself what I was building toward. I brought her everything: the bank statements, the 14 months of transfers, screenshots of Grant's calendar with its phantom business trips, and a folder of documents Isla had helped me understand, showing exactly how much exposure the brokerage carried if this ever reached a regulator. "You could go to the state licensing board today," Priya told me. "This is enough for a criminal referral, not just a civil case." "Not yet," I said. "I want the divorce filed first. I want the marital assets frozen before anyone at that company gets a chance to move money around and cover this up." She looked at me for a long moment, and I remember she said, "You've thought about this a lot." "I've had 10 days, I told her. "It doesn't take long to think clearly once you stop hoping." We filed that Friday. South Carolina is an equitable distribution state, and because the logistics consulting account had been funded with marital assets, money that, on paper, belonged to Grant and me jointly before it ever touched Marlowe's apartment lease, Priya was able to have the entire account frozen within 5 business days, pending discovery. Grant couldn't touch $1 of it. Neither could Marlowe. That was the first domino. Grant found out about the freeze on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon he was standing in my driveway, pounding on the front door of the house he no longer had a legal right to enter uninvited. I watched him through the window for a full minute before I opened it, just to see what desperation actually looked like on a man who had never once in 6 years of marriage looked desperate about anything. "You're going to destroy everything," he said, the second the door opened. "My mother's company, my whole career, everything I've built." "You built it on stolen escrow money and a second apartment," I said. "I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped covering for you." He tried a different tactic then, the one I think he'd been saving, the one that told me exactly how well he thought he still knew me. He said he'd made a mistake, that Marlowe meant nothing, that we could go to counseling, that we could try again for a baby, that none of this had to become public if I would just quietly withdraw the filing and let him handle things internally with his mother. I want you to understand something about that moment. 10 days earlier, hearing those words might have worked on me. That is the terrifying part of loving someone for 6 years. Some reflex in you keeps reaching for the door back into the life you knew, even after you've watched them burn it down in front of you. But I had spent those 10 days reading bank statements instead of crying into a pillow, and something in me had gone quiet and permanent in a way that no apology, real or performed, was going to undo. You asked me why dinner wasn't ready, I told him, the day I lost our baby. I have thought about that sentence every single hour since. There is no version of counseling that fixes a man who says that to his wife. I closed the door. He didn't come back. 3 weeks later, Priya called to tell me Grant had attempted to transfer a separate, smaller account, one we hadn't even flagged in the original freeze, into his cousin's name, the same cousin married to Odette. It was clumsy, obvious, the kind of move a desperate man makes when he still believes the people around him will protect him no matter what he's done. The cousin, to his credit, refused the transfer outright and told Priya's office about it the same afternoon, which meant the court not only reinstated the freeze on that account but took Grant's attempted concealment as evidence of bad faith in the proceedings. It cost him what little leverage he had left in the settlement talks. He had tried to hide money from me one more time, and it had done nothing but hand me more of his. The second domino was Diane. I called her myself, 10 days after the shower, and asked to meet her for coffee, which surprised her enough that she said yes before she'd thought it through. I sat across from her at a little cafe near the harbor and told her, plainly, without raising my voice once, what Priya and I had already documented for the court. The account. The 14 months. What discovery would eventually put in front of a judge, and what a judge's ruling could mean for a company that carried a fidelity bond. Diane Ashford, who had spent 6 years looking at me like something she'd scraped off her shoe, went very pale and very still. "What is it you're asking for?" she said, careful now, in a way she'd never once been careful with me before. "A clean settlement," I said. "Full half of the marital estate, no delay tactics, no lawyers dragging this into next year. And I keep the house." She was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup slowly on its saucer. "I'll speak to Grant's counsel myself," she finally said. "This doesn't need to become a public matter for either of us." She kept her word within the week. Not, I think, because she suddenly respected me, but because she understood exactly what a contested divorce, dragged into discovery, would eventually surface about her own company's books. I hadn't threatened her with anything. I had simply stopped protecting her from what was already true. The divorce was finalized in under 4 months, which anyone who's been through one will tell you is close to a miracle. I kept the house. I kept half of everything, cleanly, with no fight, exactly as Diane had promised, because she made sure of it herself. I found out later she'd had her own attorney privately tell Grant that if he contested $1 of the settlement, she would personally hand every document to the state board herself. Whatever else Diane Ashford was, she understood exactly how to protect the only thing she'd ever truly valued, and by then, it wasn't her son. I saw her once more, months later, at a farmer's market neither of us expected the other to be at. She didn't apologize. I don't think a woman like Diane knows how to construct that particular sentence. But she nodded at me once, in a way that felt almost like respect, the first honest thing to pass between us in 6 years. I nodded back and kept walking. I didn't need her apology anymore. I had already taken everything from that transaction that I was ever going to get. Grant lost his position at the brokerage 2 months after the divorce was final, not fired outright, but quietly, permanently sidelined into a role with no signing authority and no future, the kind of demotion that's really just a slow public unraveling. I heard through people who still talk to me that Marlo left before the baby was even born, once she understood there would be no money, no title, no wedding, just a man with a ruined name and a mother who'd stopped protecting him the moment protecting him became too expensive. I don't know what happened to that baby, and I think about that sometimes, in the quiet moments I don't fully control. That child didn't choose any of this, the same as mine never got the chance to choose anything at all. I don't wish either of them harm. I wish them a life far away from the man who taught me what it feels like to be crossed off your own family's list. I never got an apology. Not from Grant. Not from Diane. I stopped waiting for one somewhere along the way, when I understood that an apology from people like that was never going to be the thing that made me whole. What made me whole was watching the life they built on my silence come apart because I finally stopped being silent. I still visit the nursery sometimes. I repainted it a soft gray, and I keep the door open, not closed, because I decided grief doesn't need a locked room. It needs light and air, and a woman who's willing to walk through it instead of around it. If your name were crossed off someone's list tomorrow, would you spend your energy proving you belong there, or would you build something they could never cross out? If this story moved you, I'd love for you to stay a while longer. Hit subscribe to Sophie Revenge, because I post a new story just like this one every single day, and I promise you, there's always another woman out there learning exactly how far quiet strength can carry her.